Introductions by members. Member for Peace River North.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I'm glad we have the opportunity to do introductions a second time in the House, or I would feel really bad. It's my mother's birthday today, so I want to wish my mom. Hey. It's still her birthday today, so I haven't missed it. But I want to wish my mom, Maxine Davies, a happy 81st birthday today. Thanks.
Madam Clerk.
Introduction of bills. Orders of the day.
Minister of Finance.
Honourable Speaker, I move that this House at its next sitting resolve itself for this session into a committee to consider the supply to be granted to Her Majesty.
Members, you heard the motion. All those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Minister.
Honourable Speaker, I have the honour to present a message from Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor.
The Lieutenant Governor transmits here with estimates fiscal year ending March 31st, 2023 and supplement to the estimates fiscal year ending March 31st, 2023 and recommends the same to the Legislative Assembly. Minister.
I move that the said message and the estimates accompanying the same be referred to the Committee of Supply.
Members, you heard the motion. All those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Minister.
Honourable Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Premier of British Columbia, that the Speaker do now leave the chair for the House to go into Committee of Supply.
Continue.
I would like to begin today by acknowledging the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations upon whose territory we are gathered. I also invite everyone to consider the 204 First Nations upon whose territories we call British Columbia. To all those joining us, I would like to extend a warm welcome. Today I'm honoured to present Budget 2022, a budget that keeps us all moving forward by holding steady to what we know to be true, that we are stronger together. Budget 2022 meets today's challenges while always investing in a stronger British Columbia. It delivers action today with a plan for tomorrow, a plan that responds to the difficult days we find ourselves in. We feel the weight of two continuing health crises, the poison drug supply and the COVID-19 pandemic. We reckon with the grief that Indigenous communities have known for so long, that children were taken away from their families, sent to residential schools, and never returned home. We witnessed the destructive consequences of climate change as communities scorched by heat and wildfires in the summer face flooding and mudslides only months later. These overlapping crises claimed lives and affect us all. To all those grieving, may your loved ones be for a blessing. And yet, in these difficult days, I am reminded of a story. It's the tale of an elderly father who asks his sons to break a bundle of sticks. Despite their best efforts, they are unable to do so. However, once the bundle is untied, each stick is easily broken. And while this story has ancient roots, its message of strength and unity holds true today. Just like that bundle of sticks, we are stronger together. Because, Mr. Speaker, it is when we are under pressure that we see who we truly are as people and as a province. British Columbians are caring. When a safe and effective vaccine became available, millions of us rolled up our sleeves to protect ourselves and others. Healthcare workers, like my friend Sharon, came out of retirement to help with the largest vaccination program in our province's history. BC now has one of the lowest per capita fatality rates from COVID-19 and one of the highest vaccination rates on the continent. British Columbians are compassionate. When our neighbours, whether across the street or across the province, need a hand, We are there. The tools vary from sandbags to fire hoses and community kitchens, but we get the job done. And Mr. Speaker, British Columbians are committed. Day after day, those working on the front lines of mental health and addictions fight a rising tide of need. And on the front lines of the pandemic, we see the commitment of healthcare workers in hospitals, teachers and early childhood educators in classrooms, and clerks in grocery stores. My neighbor Carrie is a teacher, and in the early days of the pandemic, I would sometimes bump into her as each of us working from our homes would go out for a walk around the block. And she told me about how she was not only reaching out to students to see how they were doing, but she was reaching out to their parents to make sure that they too were okay. Time and time again, British Columbians have stepped up for one another, and our government is right there with you. When there are challenges that threaten us as a province, we must respond as a province. Now, some would choose differently. Some argue that cuts in a reduced role of government is the right way forward. But that's not what most British Columbians expect, and that will not be our approach. Mr. Speaker, instead of leaving people without support when times are tough, our government steps up when and where we are needed. Hundreds of dollars went directly to millions of people through the BC Recovery Benefit to help them through difficult times and support economic recovery. Hundreds of millions in Safe Start funding helped communities maintain the services that people count on, like public transit. And more than $500 million supported the hardest hit small businesses and their staff. BC has provided some of the highest supports for people and businesses per capita in Canada. Millions in funding provided a lifeline for more than 8,000 tourism businesses. And additional funding will provide support for nonprofits impacted by the pandemic, as well as the arts, culture, and music sector. This year's budget will continue support for the tourism sector as it recovers, with $25 million earmarked for them. Instead of accepting the status quo, we are always looking for ways to make life better for people today. In some cases, Mr. Speaker, that means righting past wrongs. Last summer, we reversed a 20-year-old decision that ripped up the contracts of thousands of healthcare workers, primarily affecting women and people of color. And today, Mr. Speaker, today we are reversing cuts made 2 decades ago when the previous government slashed funding for sexual assault services to help pay for tax cuts for the wealthy. Mr. Speaker, I remember those cuts. I remember when they happened because I was working with the women and the children that were most affected. And now, Mr. Speaker, we are making it right. Budget 2022 delivers $22 million to support survivors and restore stable funding for 50 sexual assault service centres here in British Columbia. Mr. Speaker, while some would choose to watch as ordinary British Columbians are left behind, we are working hard to close gaps that were made worse by the pandemic. Workers in BC now have access to a minimum of 5 paid sick days every year, the most of any province in Canada. We also have the highest minimum wage of any province, with a plan to tie future increases to the rate of inflation. These are choices that our government is proud to stand behind, and they reflect the choices that have shaped this year's budget. Budget 2022 continues our work to build a stronger British Columbia, economically, socially, and environmentally. Despite a global pandemic, Mr. Speaker, BC remains strong on all 3 fronts. Budget 2022 continues building on these strengths. BC's economic recovery is leading the nation. Among provinces, we are tied for the lowest unemployment rate, and we have the fastest job growth since the start of the pandemic. In fact, Mr. Speaker, more than 160,000 new jobs were created here last year. That includes important public services being delivered by more people, like healthcare aides and teachers. It also includes thousands of new private sector jobs in communities right around the province. To everyone who stepped up and kept our province strong, thank you. Across the province, Mr. Speaker, BC is recognized as a great place to live and raise a family. Last year, we saw the largest net migration of people from other provinces in almost 3 decades. BC is also recognized as a great place to work and to invest. For just one example, mining exploration in British Columbia exceeded $600 million in 2021. Mr. Speaker, this is the highest level in a decade. As part of Budget 2022, we are supporting the continued growth of the mining sector with $18 million over 3 years. This new funding, the minister is happy. This new funding will keep BC mining at the forefront of sustainability, create jobs, and advance reconciliation. Our province, Mr. Speaker, is also home to a thriving life sciences sector. Consider the fact that BC scientists and companies were involved with almost every COVID-19 vaccine that reached the final stages of development. And we are continuing to expand the sector with almost $200 million for Genome BC and the Michael Smith Health Research Foundation. This investment will support continued growth, creating new scientific discoveries and economic opportunities along the way. Here in British Columbia, Mr. Speaker, local talent is driving global innovation. We expect this to continue, especially as in BC, our Strategic Investment Fund starts backing BC businesses. Good things are happening in our province, and all signs point to a resilient post-pandemic economy. This, Mr. Speaker, is where the Stronger BC Economic Plan comes in. We are investing in today's talent to meet the demands of tomorrow's high-care, low-carbon economy. Within the next 10 years, labour market forecasts estimate that BC will have more than 1 million job openings. Almost 80% of these jobs will require post-secondary education or training. Preparing BC's workforce is a generation-defining challenge. It's also an opportunity. Our Stronger BC Economic Plan commits to closing the skills gap. The skilled trades, Mr. Speaker, they're a very good example. We are supporting better paying, more stable jobs for apprentices and trades workers through a new certification system. Budget 2022 advances these efforts with new training seats and targeted programs for trades workers, along with more monitoring and compliance activities at work sites. Other high-growth areas like healthcare and technology are the same ones our government has been focused on since 2017. We've already created 2,600 new tech spaces at post-secondary institutions around the province, from Simon Fraser University to Okanagan College and the British Columbia Institute of Technology. Since 2017, we've had the fastest growing nursing workforce of any province. Our ongoing commitment to add 500 more nursing seats will continue this trend. These graduates are making an immediate difference. I think of Parm, a nursing student at Douglas College that I recently met just a couple of weeks ago, and she told me how eager she is to bring her energy and her skills to the job when she graduates this April. She's really looking forward to being a nurse right here in our communities. As we create new opportunities, Mr. Speaker, we are also breaking down barriers for underrepresented communities. This is part of our ongoing work to build a more inclusive economy, and we are starting to see these results. More women, youth, and Indigenous people are working now than before the pandemic. Thousands of Indigenous learners are accessing new training opportunities for careers in early childhood education, healthcare, and more. We are also meeting a growing need for mid-career transition supports. New micro-credentials are helping thousands of people land secure jobs in established and emerging fields. BCIT's course on mass timber is a great example, Mr. Speaker. Graduates will find work on a wide range of projects, from new student housing to healthcare facilities. Programs like this one make sure that workers, including those from BC's forest sector, are driving economic growth. Mr. Speaker, forestry is and will remain foundational to our province's economy. We are embarking on a new sustainable approach to protecting and managing BC's forests, one that prioritizes value over volume, and one that protects our oldest and most at-risk forests for future generations. As we move forward with these overdue changes, our government will make sure that no one is left behind. Budget 2022 delivers $185 million over 3 years to support affected forest workers and contractors, industry, communities, and First Nations. For workers, this includes a Bridging to Retirement program, creating new jobs through innovations like mass timber, and connecting people with skills training. For communities, this supports partnerships with businesses, more diverse local economies, and the creation of jobs through new local infrastructure projects. Additional opportunities for communities and First Nations will come with redistributed forest tenures. We intend to double the amount of replaceable forest tenure held by First Nations, Mr. Speaker. This is just one example of how reconciliation is moving forward here in British Columbia. Now, this year's budget creates a new Declaration Act Secretariat with $12 million over the next 3 years. And its job, Mr. Speaker, is to ensure that legislation is consistent with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People that everybody in this House supported. And it's developed in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous peoples. Additionally, Budget 2022 continues our government's Indigenous housing investments. We are and continue to be the only province building homes both on and off reserve for Indigenous people. New funding for the Aboriginal Head Start program will support more culturally based early learning opportunities. And I think of a preschool in the Gitwanga First Nation, where children are learning the Gitsan language. They're playing in clan houses, and they're taking part in healing circles. For Indigenous communities throughout the province, programs like this one are benefiting the next generation. Mr. Speaker, a strong economy creates meaningful opportunities for everyone, regardless of your age, your wage, or your postal code. In today's world, closing the digital divide helps level the playing field. That is why connectivity has been a major priority for our government since day one. Record funding is already bringing high-speed internet to 500 rural, remote, and Indigenous communities throughout British Columbia. It's transformational work. It's happening right around the province. Today, 2 ships are making their way down the coast. They're laying fiber optic cable from Prince Rupert to Haida Gwaii and southern Vancouver Island. It's difficult work. At the end of January, the crew laid the first 50 kilometers of cable just offshore from Lax Kw'alaams, Metlakatla, and Dodge Cove. At each of its stops, new opportunities will be unlocked for small coastal communities. And today, Mr. Speaker, today we are taking another major step forward. With Budget 2022, our government's total investments in connectivity will reach $500 million. That means, Mr. Speaker, that another 280 communities will have high-speed connection to today's digital economy. And by 2027, Mr. Speaker, almost 800 communities will benefit from the province's investments in connectivity. Just as we build new digital infrastructure, we are also building new schools, new hospitals, and childcare spaces. New transit, roads, and bridges will keep people moving, keep goods flowing, and keep our economy running. Work is underway on the Broadway subway project, replacements for the Massey Tunnel and Petula Bridge, and improvements along Highway 14 on Vancouver Island. Today, we are taking our infrastructure plan to new heights, a record level $27.4 billion over the next 3 years. This includes funding to bring the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain all the way to Langley. It's in planning now, Mr. Speaker. It is the first rapid transit expansion south of the Fraser in 3 decades. In addition to major transportation projects, our expanded capital plan will build new schools, continue investments in post-secondary expansions, and bring healthcare closer to home. The largest affordable housing investment in BC's history is also part of our infrastructure plan. Mr. Speaker, British Columbia is the place to be. In just the first 9 months of last year, almost 85,000 people moved to our province. With this success, however, comes additional pressure on our housing market. And right now, too many people are still struggling to find an affordable place to buy or to live or to rent. And we can't afford to wait, Mr. Speaker, and we aren't. Mr. Speaker, our government has banned rent evictions, and we've cracked down on speculation. During the pandemic, we froze rents and then capped them permanently. More than 32,000 new affordable homes are already built or they're on their way. Thousands of new student housing beds are under construction, and soon will be easing pressure on local housing markets. Last year, Mr. Speaker, just last year, more than 53,000 new homes were registered here in British Columbia. And in the last 5 years, we've registered more rental homes than the previous 15 years combined. But we all know, Mr. Speaker, whether from the CMHC rental numbers that were released last week, or the stories that we all hear from people around the province about the challenge of finding a home that they can afford, that there is still much work to be done. Budget 2022 continues progress on our 10-year Building BC plan. Total investments in housing and homelessness supports will reach more than $1.2 billion a year for the next 3 years. That's 3 times the level of funding in 2017. Last year, we made $2 billion in low-cost financing available through the Housing Hub program. And we are already seeing results, Mr. Speaker. More than 4,400 Housing Hub homes are open or underway for middle-income families. And now, Budget 2022 will add more staff to help accelerate those Housing Hub projects because there's so much demand. Similarly, this year's budget adds $100 million to accelerate the Community Housing Fund. This will support the work of nonprofit partners to build even more mixed-income rentals and to do it faster. Mr. Speaker, the new Sunrise Centre in Kamloops is a great example of a program in action. 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to celebrate with the community when we broke ground on these new homes. Today, Mr. Speaker, the first residents, mostly low-income seniors, take comfort in knowing that their rents will always be capped at 30% of their income. And the building, Mr. Speaker, the building is right downtown, just a short walk away from pharmacy or the grocery store, making it very, very easy for seniors to use. These new homes and thousands more like them provide an affordable future for British Columbians. Now, building the homes that people need supports BC's economic strength. It's also part of our work to build a healthier society in every sense of the word. Budget 2022 commits a total of $3.2 billion over 3 years to build an even stronger health and mental health care system for British Columbians. We are adding $300 million over 3 years to help with continuing efforts to address wait lists for surgeries and scans. We're also committing $875 million in the next year to get more people immunized, more PPE purchased, and more people tested for COVID-19. And almost $150 million will increase the number of paramedics, call takers, and dispatchers to speed up emergency response times. Budget 2022 continues our government's work to deliver better care in communities throughout BC. The Cowichan, Dawson Creek, Richmond, Burnaby, and New Surrey hospital projects are all moving ahead, including a new state-of-the-art cancer centre in Surrey. And Mr. Speaker, more cancer care centres are being planned for Kamloops and Nanaimo. This year's budget will continue to invest in urgent and primary care centres. Our goal is to nearly double the number of centres by 2025. To bring culturally safe care closer to home, Budget 2022 will add traditional Indigenous health providers to local primary care teams. We are continuing to work in partnership with the First Nations Health Authority to create new First Nations primary care centres throughout the province. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that the pandemic has threatened more than our physical health. It's taken a significant toll on our mental well-being. And tragically, the poison drug crisis has only worsened. Our government is tackling this head-on with the largest investment in mental health and addiction services in BC's history. A new comprehensive system of treatment and care is being built. 5 years ago, Mr. Speaker, one simply did not exist. Despite heroic efforts from those working on and working in this new system, the poison drug supply continues to claim lives. And while it's hard to see past the tragedy, Mr. Speaker, there are stories that do inspire hope. Stories like Daniel's. After years of homelessness and living with addictions, he checked himself into a new treatment bed in Nanaimo. It definitely saved my life, Daniel says. He's now excited about the future and plans to take things one step at a time. And his first step, I have to say, was a meaningful one. For the first time in 4 years, Daniel spent Christmas with his family. It's for Daniel and so many others that frontline workers remain committed to this fight. So too is our government remained committed to this fight. We are taking action by opening hundreds of treatment and recovery beds, just like the one in Nanaimo, by becoming the first province in Canada to apply for decriminalization and offer prescribed safe supply, and by operating free and affordable counseling services and foundry centres in dozens of communities. For people living with a combination of addictions, severe mental health issues, or brain injury, Budget 2022 provides another pathway to hope. New complex care housing already on the way for Surrey, Abbotsford, and Vancouver will be expanded to another 20 sites throughout the province. This first-of-its-kind approach will help stop the cycle of evictions, shelters, emergency rooms, and jails for hundreds of people with complex care needs. Mr. Speaker, it has often been said that while we are all in the same storm, we are not in the same boat. And the pandemic has only served to deepen pre-existing gaps in services and supports. And we can see this playing out on streets right across the country. A new comprehensive approach is needed to shift from reactive to proactive solutions for homelessness. This year's budget delivers, Mr. Speaker, with $633 million to tackle homelessness over the next 3 years. When COVID-19 first hit, we acted fast to bring more than 3,000 people in off the street and into temporary shelters. And now we are working to make this move permanent by funding hundreds of new homes with supports and connecting people with spaces in newly finished buildings. To give people stability while new permanent homes are being built, we are extending leases on some temporary spaces. Additionally, new rent supplements will help thousands of low-income people find secure housing in the rental market, and it comes with wraparound supports. While an immediate response is vital, we must also shift our attention upstream toward prevention, Mr. Speaker. The late Catherine McParland was a fierce advocate on youth homelessness. She also became a friend and advisor to this government and to me. As Catherine described it, foster care is a superhighway to homelessness. And she called on government to be part of the solution. And our government is listening to people like Catherine, and things are going to change, Mr. Speaker. Today, we are making good on our promise to support all youth who are aging out of care. Budget 2022 provides more income supports, new earning exemptions, and a whole host of housing, health, and life skills supports that will continue for youth aging out of care until the age of 27. Is this, Mr. Speaker, as a mom, I know that the responsibility that I have to my children did not end on their 19th birthdays, and neither does government's responsibility. Mr. Speaker, government's responsibility to youth doesn't just apply to youth aging out of care. Giving every child the best possible start is key to strengthening the social fabric of our province. As K-12 enrollment continues to grow, we are continuing investments to match. Budget 2022 commits an additional $664 million over 3 years to respond to increased enrollment. Work also continues on state-of-the-art classrooms around the province. This past year, 20 new or improved schools opened in communities like Courtenay, Smithers, and Surrey, and more schools are under construction now. Many, Mr. Speaker, will include childcare spaces, which is good news for families. Parents know there will always be a space for their child in public school. And we are working hard to bring the same certainty to childcare. With this year's budget, we are embedding childcare within the Ministry of Education. This is all part of our government's work to establish childcare as a core service that's available to any family that wants it, when they need it at a price they can afford. Already, Mr. Speaker, thousands of families are paying less for childcare than when we first formed government. We funded over 26,000 new spaces, surpassing our original target. Taken together, this work has established BC as a national leader on childcare. And it meant that when the federal government came to the table, it meant that we were ready. Mr. Speaker, a historic agreement is now in place that brings BC closer than ever to $10 a day childcare. Within 7 years, another 40,000 spaces will be funded in partnership with the federal government. And by the end of the year, parent fees for children aged 5 and under will drop by an average of 50%. Mr. Speaker, this is a huge win for families and one that our government has pushed for since day one. Budget 2022 takes another big step forward on making childcare more affordable for families. We are going to lower the average fees for preschool and before and after school care to less than $20 a day for the 23-24 school year. Mr. Speaker, as childcare becomes a core service for BC families, we must also train more skilled professionals. Already, we have doubled the number of early childhood educator seats over the last 3 years, and now Budget 2022 will add hundreds of new seats to train even more ECEs. This year's budget will also extend the wage enhancement to even more childcare professionals. It will now include ECEs who split their time between working with children and supervising staff, answering calls from parents, and helping with the other behind-the-scenes work. Mr. Speaker, the last year has been a powerful reminder of how closely connected people's health and well-being are to that of our natural environment. In this year's budget consultations, I heard a united message from British Columbians. Action is needed now, both to fight climate change and to protect people and communities from the effects of climate-related disasters. Budget 2022 will help keep people safe today while building a better, more climate-resilient British Columbia for generations to come. 3 years ago, our government introduced Clean BC, one of the strongest climate plans in North America. We then accelerated the fight against climate change with the Clean BC Roadmap to 2030. Today, an additional $1 billion for Clean BC will help us reach a low-carbon future faster. This year's budget strengthens the Clean BC program for industry to help decarbonize our economy. We are also creating a new clean buildings tax rebate to support deep energy retrofits of larger rental and commercial buildings. And while most people want to make the right choice by the environment, it isn't always the most affordable option, and we are working hard to change that. Budget 2022 will remove the PST from all electric heat pumps while increasing the PST on fossil fuel heating equipment, so that these revenues will offset the cost of new incentives to make heat pumps more affordable for homeowners in rural and northern British Columbia. Electric vehicles are another example of how we are making climate-smart decisions more affordable, Mr. Speaker. BC leads North America in the transition to electric vehicles. To build on this momentum, Budget 2022 will continue the popular Go Electric program. And to make used EVs even more affordable, we are going to remove the PST. This year's budget also launches a Clean Transportation Action Plan and continues growing the province's network of bike lanes and multi-use pathways. We are also expanding exemptions to the motor fuel tax and to include hydrogen-powered vehicles. This will benefit companies like BC-based Hydra Energy as it works to transition heavy-duty vehicles to hydrogen power. And while the fight against climate change continues, recent disasters show that we must strengthen our defenses at home. Mr. Speaker, while we've all experienced the realities of climate change this year, I can't help but think of the Indigenous people in the Nicola Valley, farmers in Abbotsford, the residents of Merritt, Princeton, and Lytton. No single community can rebuild on its own. We are going to get through this together. This year's budget delivers more than $2.1 billion to help us prepare for, respond to, and recover from floods, heat waves, and wildfires. It begins with $1.5 billion to support people and communities with flood recovery. A total of $400 million will cover known costs from removing debris to providing financial assistance for hard-hit people, businesses, and communities. An additional $1.1 billion is earmarked in contingencies to support additional recovery costs in the months ahead. Mr. Speaker, the Government of Canada has been a steadfast partner through these difficult times. An allocated $5 billion in federal assistance will help backstop BC's flood recovery efforts. As a sign of what we can accomplish together, the largest financial recovery package ever for BC farmers is on the way. Mr. Speaker, there is a long road ahead, and rebuilding what we have lost is only part of the job. We must act now to protect people and communities against future climate disasters. A total of $120 million provided this year will support the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund and Indigenous-led emergency management. This will help power local emergency services and operations centres, map floodplains, support flood risk assessments, and more. And even with strong preventative action, British Columbia must be ready to protect people, property, and communities from climate disasters. In moments of crisis, the BC Wildfire Service and Emergency Management BC have been unwavering. They've been unwavering in their response. We owe them our thanks and so much more. Budget 2022 commits $145 million over 3 years to increase staff at both agencies and move toward a more proactive approach. For EMBC, this means a stronger provincial response to emergencies and more coordination with communities and First Nations. And for the BC Wildfire Service, this marks a transition toward year-round firefighting and risk mitigation. To support these efforts, Budget 2022 delivers nearly $200 million to support wildfire prevention activities. This includes $90 million in new funding to help more communities participate in programs like Fire Smart. When the Tremont Creek wildfire threatened the community of Logan Lake, we saw what it meant to be a fire-smart community and the difference it can make in an emergency. Taken together, these measures will help British Columbia stand strong in the face of a disaster. And while extreme weather events get the most attention, we know that even the gradual effects of a changing climate can have significant implications, from the kind of food we grow to the design of our sewers and roads. We must be prepared for change on both fronts. This is where BC's climate preparedness and adaptation strategy comes into play. Budget 2022 will begin implementing the strategy province-wide with $83 million. So what does that look like on the ground, Mr. Speaker? It looks like more state-of-the-art climate monitoring stations along BC's rivers, lakes, and shorelines. To better predict what is coming, we need to start collecting the best data possible. It looks like a new extreme heat response framework that will better predict where and when heat waves will hit and how we can help the most vulnerable. It looks like an expanded River Forecast Centre and provincial floodplain mapping program. And finally, it means strengthening our partnership with local governments and Indigenous communities to work together to understand, monitor, manage, and reduce climate risks. And while the fight against climate change continues, we can and we will ensure that we are ready to protect people and communities. Mr. Speaker, we have all learned a great deal over the last 2 years. And through each challenge, we have seen time and time again that we are stronger together. There is a long road ahead. And as we all rebuild and repair the damage left by these difficult times, if patience wanes or hope wavers, remember that you are not alone in this. You have another 5 million or so people ready to lend a hand. Just as the bundled sticks would not break, neither will we. And Mr. Speaker, while we all know that we all know what we're fighting against, be it COVID-19, climate change, or a poison drug supply, we cannot lose sight of who and what we are fighting for. For first days of kindergarten and graduations. For people taking a brave step, their first step on their path to hope. For small businesses to bank on growth. For communities built to withstand any storm. And for the healthcare workers, the childcare professionals, the teachers, and the bus drivers who got us through these last 2 years. We will reach those better days ahead by continuing to build on today's strengths And together, Mr. Speaker, we will discover the opportunities that tomorrow holds. Thank you.
Member for Kamloops North Thompson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and now for something completely different. I would like to thanks for this time to make some initial comments on behalf of the official opposition, and I will be our designated speaker, but I will provide a few comments today just to give a quick overview of what we have seen in the budget over the first couple of hours that we were able to review it ahead of the speech. First off, thank you to the Minister for providing her comments and the budget, and especially to the Ministry staff. It's no small feat to pull together a budget, and especially this is not an annual budget this year. This has been built in a 10-month time frame because if we all remember, last year's budget was 2 months later than normal. So congratulations to the staff for being able to work under incredibly tight timelines to be able to bring forward a budget in only 10 months' time. You know, Budget 2022 really seems to be a picture into some priorities that this government has had over the last 5 years, and not necessarily in a good way. It really does and should be setting the tone for a post-pandemic British Columbia, but frankly, it falls short in many areas. It's important, I think, for everyone watching to understand the role of opposition. We really do. We dive into the budget books. We don't see them ahead of 10:30 this morning, and we're left to our own to start digging through and start trying to find where exactly these programs are coming from, how they're being funded, and whether or not it's substantially new from previous years. And I have to say, frankly, given that this is the government with the dubious distinction of being the most secretive one in Canada, sometimes that job can take a lot of digging and starting to go through the very back pages of the various books that we have to dig through. When we look at things around key issues that people in their everyday lives are very concerned about right now, be it affordability, childcare, health, mental health and addictions, job creation, there's a lot of promises, Mr. Speaker, but frankly, we've heard those promises for 5 years now. This is the 6th budget under this Premier's watch, and we're hearing a lot of the same language, a lot of the same programs, and frankly, a lot of missed deadlines or questionable deadlines at best. There's a difference between talk and there's a difference between action and deliverables. And if we look at the housing crisis as one example, that crisis is deepening. It's deepening every year, it's deepening every month, and there's no relief in sight. In fact, last year, it was going to take an unacceptable 34 years, a record number of years, to be able to afford a down payment in Vancouver. This year, that number is now up to 36 years. Again, that is under this Premier's watch. Prices are up 43% in Chilliwack. They're up 34% on the island and 49% in the Peace region. This is truly a province-wide issue and a province-wide problem, and there does not seem to be any hope on the horizon. And that's just on buying a house. But housing affordability is also key to renters. And time and again, we have seen report after report, and in fact, the Minister thankfully acknowledged those reports in her comments today, because they certainly don't acknowledge them when we bring up those same reports in question period, about the skyrocketing rents around this province. Affordability in housing is impacting every single person in this province that's trying to have a safe, affordable place to live. And we do not see in this budget meaningful, tangible steps to address that. And I'll give you some examples on that, Mr. Speaker. It's good to hear the Minister of Housing and the Attorney General finally acknowledge that no tax policy is going to put a roof over someone's head. Finally an acknowledgement that supply is critical to try to make sure that people have access to safe, affordable housing, be it a renter or being it for ownership. So at a time, imagine my surprise,